Alright, welcome back to the channel. Warhammer Man back in the studio, and today we're going to be painting up some Orc terrain. If you're new to the channel, make sure you like and subscribe for more videos like this. Everything from painting and conversion tutorials, reviews of new products, unboxings, etc. All kind of magnetizations, customizing, adding lights to your terrain. Anything from Warhammer 40,000, Age of Sigmar, Necromunda, Warcry, and obviously Kill Team as well. Pretty much anything Games Workshop, I'm into it. So, and obviously, make sure if you are new that you like and subscribe, share it with your friends, etc. Today we're going to be painting up our Orc terrain scenery. So far all I've done is just basically done the initial assembly, and then I went ahead and painted everything with like a black primer and then also a dark brown primer as well. And I did mostly like a zenithal with the dark brown, so there's still some shades of like the black from the underside there. But now we're going to be taking dry brush technique, and this is just going to be for like a simple basic strategy for painting this stuff so we can get everything painted up and on the table in a relatively short amount of time. So and I do use all Citadel paints. These have been transferred into our dropper bottles. So here we have a, mournfang brown, mournfang brown, uh, and we're just going to kind of lighten everything up a little bit. I've shaped these up pretty well already. So that just makes them a little easier to kind of put out. And then obviously because we're going to be doing dry brushing, we want to be using just a regular piece of paper or newspaper or something like that. Don't want to use our typical like wet palette or plastic or anything. And then for this, we're going to be using like a heavy, large makeup brush. It's important here that less than the actual detail that we have a nice size volume brush so that we can get everything dry brushed speedily, fast, quick. We want to get it done quick and efficiently. So at first, the most important thing is to kind of just like saturate the brush and just kind of get it all up in the bristles here. And then once we have a nice like saturation and everything, each time we dip it back into our paint, it will just be like that much easier to get it where we want it to be. But initially, you just want to make sure you don't have like big clumps of paint stuck in your brush or like wet spots or anything like that. So you don't just get like big globs of this paint on our model. So there we have like basically a nice little space, a little bit of paper underneath, and now we have a nice saturation inside of the actual brush itself. So when we go to actually like paint something, you can start on an area that you're not going to see, like the bottom, just to make sure that you've got the desired effect basically. But all we're looking to do is just sort of add like a little bit of a lighter brown kind of color, and then this is going to pick up around like the edges of our terrain piece. But we just want to basically go around everything. We're not as worried about getting it down in the cracks, especially not on like the undersides of our pieces here. So, and that is basically the effect that we're looking for right there with this color. And you can see how quick that was to just do that little piece there. So, and now that we have the actual brush saturated, we won't have to be like dolling up as much paint like each time there. All right, and then again, we just want to start off somewhere in case we got just a little too much paint on our brush. We're just going to go around the edges, and then by the time we get to the more important areas, we make sure that we don't have like big streaky areas or like bunches of paint coming off all at once. And we don't have to use a ton of pressure or anything. We're not like pushing real hard, basically just like feathering this over stuff. Some areas can have a little more paint on them, some can have a little less. Obviously with this stuff, we're just looking for like an overall messy, multicolored paint job that looks good when we're done. And then just after our initial like bit of paint there, you can kind of see the difference between the two. Not like crazy or anything, just a little more detail. That's all we're looking for. I'm always just a little extra careful after I like dip the brush, and I always just make sure that I like run it across the paper and get some of the paint back off of it. And that's basically the look we're going for. And we just want to keep going through and basically just doing this on the entire set. I've got a pretty clear idea what I want to do with these, but this is the first set I'm going to be painting up. But just with like overall previous paint jobs and then, experience and whatnot, and then obviously just looking at this terrain, I've got a pretty good idea of what I'm planning on doing. So we can just kind of go over that while I knock out these next couple of pieces. So basically for the actual main portion of the terrain, I'm going to go through, do this, and then I'm going to come back in with like Ryza rust and do a little basic like stippling technique where I just kind of like poke around some of the like rust color all over the stuff. And then afterwards, I want to go through and do like a dry brush with some metallics, probably a leadbelcher, and then maybe just lighten it up just a little bit more with like mournfang steel or something like that. And then I will go through and do a similar type technique on like picking out some actual details with like a lighter bit of silver after we do like the dry brushing with the metals. And then obviously we'll do some little bits of color too, maybe like some reds and some yellows, a little bit of like white for some of the orc iconography. After that, it's really just about however much detail we want to add in. But the most important thing is to just get like a few of those initial colors on there, and then get obviously like the metallics and the rusty kind of look to all kind of blend together and look like it belongs. And then after that, it's our terrain, so we don't want it to be too detailed that it's like taking away from like the actual models on the table, especially if we're going to be filming like battle reports or taking pictures or anything like that. You want to make sure that the terrain looks good and looks like realistic or like semi-detailed, but again, you don't want it taken away from the models. I don't want like a ton of bright colors or like clean metallics to where it's going to be like drawing your attention away from what's on the board. A lot of times people will like have way too many colors. I think in the terrain, should be the type of thing where, it's kind of in the background. And then if you start to pay attention to it, you can start seeing all the cool extra little details and stuff. But the last thing you want to do is like try to look at the board or look at pictures or whatever. And the first thing that catches your eye is like brightly colored or metallics on like some terrain, because that's not really the point. Obviously the point is for the board to look good, look like uniform, like it belongs. And then obviously the models are the main highlight or aspect or like important part of your pictures or videos, etc. So, and again, that's just my personal preference. For me, like with the terrain, the most important thing is that the whole table looks like at least somewhat uniform. I don't want like parts of it to be like clean and look good and brand new, and then other parts look like an old raggy town from like hundreds of years ago that are like, all rusty. I want it to all look like it belongs on the table. And part of how we'll do that is when we finish everything off, I will go through with the airbrush, or you could alternatively just dry brush, but I'll go around the base of everything and I'll just give it kind of like a little sand color so that it will blend in with our actual game board. And you could do any of the steps. You could stop anywhere you want if you don't want to do some of the extra details, or you don't have an airbrush, or you don't want to do like the sand at the end. Most important thing, obviously, is to just demonstrate like easy way that you can paint up a lot of terrain in a little time that looks good. And that's the three main things. We want to do a lot of terrain, we want to get it done quickly, and we want it to look good when it's done. So, that's our three main criteria for this set. It's not going to be as clean as some of our other sets, but that's obviously what we're going for. We don't want it to look, as clean as like our Adeptus, what's it called? I almost said Mechanicus, but that's not it. The Mechanicus sets we make look like kind of rusty and beat down and have like streaking lines and everything. the Sector Imperialis. That's the one. We don't want it to look like as clean and uniform as the Sector Imperialis stuff. That one we try to have like, a little bit of like weathering done, but overall try to make it look like good and fresh and clean and everything. With this, we want the opposite. We want this to look like it would give you tetanus if you touch it. And then obviously there's a lot of like orc iconography throughout this set. If you wanted to use it for Necromunda or something like that, and you didn't want, excuse me, you didn't want the orc iconography, you could easily like put something else there, carve it off, cover it up, put like little bits over top, like the little orc heads, or just not pick out those details so it's less noticeable. I think that, in my case, I'm not worried about it if there's like little bits of orc stuff. But if you were doing like a dedicated Necromunda board, but you wanted to use this terrain and you just didn't want it to like have orc stuff, you want to make sure it fits and look underhivey, you could maybe like 3D print some little like gang stuff that fits more into like Necromunda. Or you could cut some bits out of plastic art. Lots of like little basic conversions you could do. You could also add on like lights or something like that. If you wanted to kind of take this to the next level, you could drill out like little holes and put in LEDs, etc. There's definitely some options here for stuff. Now with something like that, you would probably want to at least test fit, if not install all that stuff ahead of time. So I'm not planning on doing anything like that with this build, but I've done quite a few light builds and magnetization builds in the past. So I highly recommend you check those out. One of my favorite builds is my Necromunda board, which is basically completely magnetized and then also uses like a bunch of cool little like LED tea lights to light it up as well. And that's like super popular video and literally shows exactly how I did it, how to make all the pieces go together and all the accessories, everything. And it came out absolutely phenomenal. One of my favorite builds by far. Unfortunately, I put so much time into magnetizing it and everything. I just haven't had a chance to actually complete painting it. But that is definitely something that will happen eventually in the future. This is probably the longest step that we'll have. The metallics as well. But we like progressively are doing less and less as we go. Because obviously if we start off with like the dark brown and then we do lighter and lighter colors or different colors, we don't want to do a heavier coat as our like third coat or our second dry brush. We want to just do like progressively lighter as we go, so we're covering up like less and less of the other stuff. And then with the stippling, that's going to go all over the place, down in the cracks, on like the raised edges and everything. So that will kind of be like a little different than the dry brush. The dry brush picks out like the edges and the details that are like protruding, as where like the stippling will go like all over the place. It'll go on the top easily accessible edges, it'll go down in the cracks, everything, and we'll just kind of demonstrate that as we go. But that's what we're looking for. Just that little bit of extra color. And there's a lot of different stuff on here. There's a bunch of different like metallic bits that will look good, like all different colors. There's actually like some wood. There's some little light bits, some orc like iconography like we were discussing. There's some parts that are like moving, like the pistons on like the oil rig, which I don't have demonstrated right here. But that, would have like obviously like a kind of oily, like clean surface from the action of the piston going like up and down as it's like mining for oil. So that's going to have like more of a bright shiny steel. Some of like the platform bits have what appears to be like more of like a cleaner looking steel, or like the different patterns that are on there. So maybe you want to make them just a little bit brighter, like that diamond plating, etc. And you might notice as you go that some of the pieces are a little brighter than you want them, or like a little darker, I should say, that you didn't get quite as much dry brushing. You can always just add a little bit back in. That's the beauty of this. And keep in mind also, especially when you're doing like lighter colors on top of a darker color, that a lot of times it will look really bright when you finish it, and then the paint kind of like, I don't know what the correct term is, like it kind of just like fades into the darkness, and then it won't seem as bright shortly afterwards. So it's partially because like the actual paint's drying, and just kind of getting like the colors faded back into the darker stuff. But overall, just as a general rule, typically when you finish something is the brightest it'll be, and it slowly just kind of fades over time. Also, the contrast as you add in more colors and as you change like the overall palette of your item that you're painting, you'll notice that the colors kind of blend in together. So we might see like a strong contrast now between our brown, our dark brown base coat and our black. But as we add in like the Ryza rust, that will brighten everything up a little bit. So it'll kind of tone down the contrast between like our browns and blacks. And then as we do the metals, it will do like the same thing as well. So, sometimes they will look like there's a little too much contrast initially, but then by the time, you get finished without changing anything, just by adding in the additional colors and everything, you'll notice it starts to stand out a little bit less. And sort of like the stuff you put on first will all kind of blend together. So it's not a bad thing to have a little extra contrast now and kind of stand out a little more now, because later on it might be a lot less noticeable. And any kind of like little mess ups or like extra globs of paint or anything like that is all just going to kind of fade away by the end. So we're not that worried about everything being perfect. Most important thing, like I said, is just getting some paint slapped down, getting this stuff at least like started or rolling, so that we can get on to the next step and get everything. Once we get a decent amount of paint on everything and get everything looking decent, you can spend as much time as you want after that, as you're like playing with your set, as you're using it over time, making it look better and better, or when you get tired of painting some models, you can bust out a little terrain and add some more detail to it. But the most important thing is we want to get it like tabletop ready in as little amount of time as possible. So, and normally I'll do like the cut videos. I may go back through and do just like a quick cut video instead of doing this where I kind of film everything. But I know some people like to do both. Also, some people like to just like listen in the background while they are hobbying as well. So this is going to be the long version, and then we'll have like just a short version as well, in case you don't want to watch me do all this and you just want to like skip through to see the actual techniques and see me lay down a little paint, but you don't want to hear my voice for however long this takes, or watch every single bit, every little brush stroke I do the whole time. So, and also because I put these into the bottles, the paints are like a little bit watered down. Just something I do so they flow a little bit easier. I'll use either water or flow improver. So if you're not doing this, you may be able to go just off of like plastic, maybe not a wet palette, but at least the plastic itself with a little bit of paper. But in the end, I think either way, you use about the same amount of paint. I find that putting them into these bottles, even if I like waste a little paint by pouring out extra, makes up for like never having a pot just like dry up or go bad, because of the poor design, in my opinion, poor design of the pots. But I've been using these things for like 20 something years, Games Workshop paints. And, they've changed the pots a couple times over the years. They did like the screw tops, the pop tops, all the different styles. And none of them just quite seem to ever work. I'm not sure why they don't switch over to the dropper bottles, or just have a second, line where you can buy the dropper bottles alternatively. Um, because there's definitely enough people out there that convert them themselves that I think they could sell them. But overall, it's very cheap to switch over to the dropper bottles. I use the actual Army Painter ones because they're a little better quality. But you can buy just like cheap ones off of Amazon or just shipped straight from China, like super, super cheap. But I got a pretty good deal on the Army Painter ones, so I wasn't mad about them. And then also you can hear when I'm shaking them around that I put in the little Army Painter like ball bearings as well. Those work excellent, and I definitely recommend those, like the little ball bearings to mix the paints. they make a huge difference, you know, in just how long you have to shake it for. But I mean, again, you could have like a paint shaker, one of the little electric ones, and you don't need those. You could have both. But I do like to have them. They work extremely well with the Citadel contrast paints as well, because those things are notoriously, you have to shake them for an extremely long amount of time, because like the actual pigment settles in like clumps in the bottom, and if you don't shake them up, they literally don't work right. I know a lot of people who have used the Citadel contrast paints and were like not that impressed by them. And honestly, I think probably they didn't have them shaken up correctly, because I love the Citadel contrast line. They work extremely, extremely well. And honestly, like the effect you get off of the Citadel contrast paints is the equivalent of being a much better painter than you actually are, in my opinion. They're basically like cheater paints because they can make you look, I mean, the amount of effort that you put in or just the overall quality of your paint jobs looks better than it is, or looks more like higher quality than the actual effort you put into it. You know, in my opinion, I'm not saying they're going to make you a master level painter, but overall they work extremely well. So I'll definitely ripping through this stuff though. Should have checked to make sure my bottle was full before I started all this. Just gonna see while I'm doing this. Pops off like pretty easily, but you never have to worry about squeezing it too hard and it popping off when you don't want it to. And I think that is what you really are going for with the Army Painter ones. And then I just keep one with a little bit of water in it, or flow improver. And then I just pour it straight in there. Whoops. Gotta be careful of that lid. If you got too much paint on the top of the lid, it like drips down onto your bottle. You can pretty much fit one of these Citadel paints in there like perfectly. It's like the exact amount that you need. I'm not gonna worry about like getting it all out of there, but I'll usually like add a little bit more water as after I get the majority of the paint out, and then I'll just kind of like keep doing that until like 99% of the paint is out of the pot, and then I just throw them away. Or if I like wash them out and use them for a water pot. Sometimes if I'm like traveling, I want like a little uh pot full of water to like brush, but I usually use like the washes for that. So there we go. We're back in the business now. And you can see it has like a nice orange to it already. So it's kind of giving it like that little bit of like a rusty look. And then when we come in with like that Ryza what's it called? Ryza red, Ryza rust. You know, it'll kind of give it like just a little bit more brightness, and then also like kind of down in the cracks, where you might see like a little more rust gathering as well. And then like hopefully or ideally, by the time this is all said and done, we'll have a nice contrast from like our darks all the way to like our orangey, like you know, rusty kind of looking color. And then the bright little bits of metallics will look like the edges where stuff is like bumped against it or rubbed against it. You know, and then like the orange will stay more down in the cracks. So we'll have like a nice contrast between the blacks and the browns and the orange like down in the cracks. So, but you'll see like there, I get a little extra on there. Not a big deal. Not a big deal. And when I get to metallics, I'm going to focus a little bit more of the metallics towards like the tips of this, where they would be like more likely to be like bright around the edges. But you can kind of see already how much more the detail just stands out from that little bit that we've done here. You know, and this is taken, like, this is the equivalent of like 2% effort, as where like detailed painting, you know, it takes much more effort, much more time. But, you know, sometimes you just don't feel like doing that. Sometimes you just want to throw on a video or something or a movie and, you know, listen to a podcast and just kind of do this. So that's why I like terrain actually is like the sometimes you feel like painting, but you don't feel like painting little models. You don't want to have to worry about the details. You know, same with the airbrush. Sometimes I feel like airbrushing. Sometimes I do not feel like airbrushing. You know, maybe I just don't feel like cleaning the airbrush when I'm done. Maybe I just don't feel like all that whole deal, or I want to listen to something. And the airbrush, like the little compressor, is kind of annoying sometimes. I think one of the biggest things about the hobby is just finding that balance between everything you can do, so that sometimes you might not feel like hobbying, but there's a different part of the hobby that you probably wouldn't mind doing. You just got to make sure that you realize what it is that you're tired of. This might not be completely tired of the hobby. You might just be a little bit tired of like one specific thing, like detail painting, or maybe you've been painting terrain for a couple weeks and now you're just like, oh, I don't feel like doing anything. I don't feel like hobbying it up. And then you're like, well, really, what you don't feel like doing is just painting like massive amounts of like big terrain. But that's when it's time to do like, you know, a nice little infantry squad or like a character that you've been putting off because you want them to look extra good. And then, you know, you can take your time, kind of reward yourself by painting somebody cool like Gulliman or Baden or one of like, you know, these awesome models that you've been excited for, as opposed to just like some big piece of terrain that takes little bits of detail. Maybe you want to just see like, all right, it's been a while since I've really painted something to the best of my abilities. And this is like a showcase model in the sense that, you know, it's the same way as I was talking about with the terrain earlier. Nobody's really going to get down and look at the terrain like super close. For the most part, it's more to just set the board, set the kind of ambiance and like, you know, the world that you're playing on. But people are going to pay attention to, you know, your actual units. Well, in the same sense that like, you know, your regular troopers can look good and everything, but people are drawn naturally to like the sergeants of the squad or the heavy or special weapons troopers. And then even more so towards that, you know, they're drawn towards like your elite's choices or your vehicles or your characters. So I like to always make sure that I put extra work into the stuff that people are more likely to notice. And then I'll spend a little less time working on just like your, you know, average Joe Space Marine or whatever. And again, that's just my style. I know some people just paint everything equally awesome. or equally poorly, that's 100% up to you as well. But for me, you know, I do what matters and what's going to get noticed. I think that if you have a mediocre painted army with some, you know, decent looking terrain, and then you have like a couple nice vehicles and a couple like really nice characters, I think it will give like an overall more noticeable or more definable look to like your collection. So just by having a couple really nice models, like, you know, like your characters or your vehicles or whatever, and then having a fully painted like terrain set and, you know, some mediocre looking like troops, etc., I think it makes it look like you have a much nicer collection than you actually do. And then you can always add in the extra details and a couple extra steps later on all the stuff that you kind of cut corners on in the beginning. Shouldn't say cut corners, but maybe just like, you know, didn't quite put as much love into. So it's starting to look nice. Already got a little bit of that rusty terrain looking good here. Then when we're all said and done, we can look back too and see how long it actually took to paint all this up and have a more accurate idea. Because I'm really not sure, and I also did not like allocate a specific amount of time to this. I figured it would take me a few hours. It is quite a bit. And then obviously, like, you know, once I get to a nice stopping point or once I'm running short on time, I can kind of call it there. Somewhere in between the two, maybe. The detail on this stuff is awesome. Definitely looks really, really cool. I'm a big fan of these. In case you heard that little pop, I didn't actually glue these walls together. I just kind of stuck them together, and the little bit of primer was enough to give me like the resistance to make them hold. So like each of these is not actually glued together. They're all just like two separate pieces stuck together on their own accord. Which I think you probably could glue them like this and then add the floors afterwards. Uh, but there's little like pegs on the floors, so I can't guarantee that. So I would recommend leaving, like I did, leaving them unglued now or going ahead and assembling them completely and then doing this. But because I want to do just a little bit more like metallic kind of detail on the floors, I wanted to leave them separate, at least initially. You know, maybe after I do a set of them, I will change my mind, and next time I'll just put it all together and not worry about it. But this is my first set of these, so I'm still kind of experimenting with what works. And if there's one thing I've noticed over time, it's better to leave stuff into like a couple little like sub assemblies during painting and then just spend a little extra time assembling it as you finish and then just touching up any little spots you need to. Especially like when I paint like models, like if you've watched any of my previous videos, I always do like the head sprues. I'll take like, you know, 20 heads for an army or for a commission or whatever, and I will mount them like across a sprue on like a little stand. And then I can just kind of like paint all the heads at once. I don't have any little like shoulder pads or weapons or anything getting in the way, blocking my vision, blocking my paintbrush, anything like that. So like when it's all said and done, I have a bunch of nicely painted heads. Usually paint up a couple extra ones too in case some don't come out looking that great, or I don't like you know, the design on some of them. whatever, you know, if I have like extra little targeters or some without helmets and some with helmets, you know, I'll just paint a few extra ones up. And then as I'm assembling them later on, I can kind of decide what goes where. But I think it makes the overall quality of the paint job so much better because again, you have like, you know, clear access to like the eyes. You can also do, you know, 20 heads in a row just by handling one sprue. You're not like picking up 20 individual models and, you know, trying to like get down in there and do all the eyes. Like you basically just go like assembly line style right across them one after the next. Or like with like the Sisters of Battle is what I'm picturing, like the hair or the eyes on the helmets, or the actual helmets themselves, or little gold or silver details, etc. I think it just the little extra time prepping in the beginning speeds up and overall improves the quality of the paint job in the end. And I think that's really what it's about. You know, in my opinion, the biggest thing about hobbying for me is being efficient. And part of that is probably just because I'm a commission painter and, you know, time is money obviously, but also, you know, just being able to get better quality without the frustration of messing something up. All right, so yeah, that's a nice little start right there. Obviously have a nice little bit of paint on everything. Now you can see after doing all these up, they're a little bit more orange and the actual like bits right here are not quite as much. And I still have a little paint on my palette. So I'm just going to go back and just kind of brighten these up a little bit. And that might have to do with you know, the initial paint I was using was a little more watered down, so it just kind of got absorbed up in here. I might have just put a little bit less on because I was just getting started with it. But you know, it takes just a second to go back and add a little more. And obviously you can see because I'm using such a big brush how fast I'm able to just knock out like, you know, these big pieces of terrain like this. As where if I'm using like, you know, this brush is my next smallest one. These are like makeup brushes. You know, if I use this one, it's going to take me 10 times as long as if I just use this big one here. And for certain details, I might want to switch to the more detailed one or the smaller one. But for this stuff, when it's just big and it's the very first coat I'm putting on, I really just want to cover as much surface area as fast as possible. And you might also have like a brush that's dedicated only for metallics. Maybe you don't want to use your metallics and your regular brush together. That's totally cool as well. You know, I probably overpaid for these makeup brushes because I bought them at um, like Walmart. So you know, I paid like I think I want to say it was like 15 bucks for like 3 or 4 of these. But I know you can get like super cheap ones on Amazon or you know from China for like a fraction of that price. But to tell you the truth, you know, I've had these for a while. They last really good. They're way better than actual like you know, quality hobby painting dry brushes, etc. They hold up a lot longer, last a lot longer, and you know anything that you can buy that's not meant for the hobby, even something like you know overpriced makeup brushes, is going to be exponentially cheaper than if you would have bought that specifically for the hobby. Like the markup on anything that's for like hobbying is like 10 times what it is for like any other industry. I feel like. I mean, maybe not everything, but if you had like you know paints that are specifically made for miniatures, they're probably going to be like a quality difference. But overall, with like cheap brushes, I've found that you know by the time a nice quality brush wears out, or a cheap quality brush wears out, or whatever, you could have bought probably you know 10 or 20 cheap brushes for the price of that one good brush. So the real question is, do you want to have to like take super care of your good brush, or do you want to just be able to knock out like, you know, 20 decent brushes? Or somewhere in between. You might want to have a couple nice brushes that are like, you know, expensive ones, and then you might want to have a bunch of, you know, just cheapo brushes that if they get damaged or ruined or the bristles don't last or whatever, you can just throw them away and switch to a new one. I like a combination in between. I have a couple of nice brushes that I just use for like eyes or like super crazy like details or whatever. But the majority of my brushes are just little cheapo brushes that I get super, super cheap, typically from China. And I mean, we're talking super cheap. You can get like knockoff brushes that are decent quality for like less than $1 a piece, as where you might spend, you know, 10, 20, $50 on a nice paintbrush, like brand name. And if that gets ruined, even a 10 or $20 paintbrush, you're gonna be bummed out if you ruin that. But with a dollar paintbrush, it's like, oh, that sucks. On to the next. And I mean, I'm pretty resourceful too. So even when I do wear out, like one of my cheap paintbrushes, I'll like cut the like the head with the bristles off of it, and then I'll use it for like a stir stick, or I'll use it to apply like texture paint. And then I don't have to worry about having a texture paint tool that I have to clean off after I do that. I can just use one of my little disposable brush handles and then throw it away. And again, that's just all about the efficiency. Because I mean, sometimes when I don't use the airbrush, it's because I don't feel like cleaning it, a bunch of times. And like, in my opinion, I've been using the airbrush now for a couple of years and I love it. I wish I would have got one way sooner, but there's definitely times when I won't bust out the airbrush because I just don't feel like cleaning it because you have to clean it in between like every paint. You got to make sure you take care of it as you go. You got to make sure your paints are like the right consistency, which isn't that big of a deal, but it's definitely noticeable enough that sometimes I don't use it. So I actually ended up with a tiny bit of paint back on my palette once again. So this time I'm real happy with how everything looks, but I'm just going to go through and just get a couple little more areas. Just kind of use it up because I don't want to waste it. But again, just not having to worry about knocking over a paint pot. You save so much in the long run. You could waste a little bit of paint and just not knocking one over and having to clean it up or spilling the whole thing out on your desk. And then, obviously like wasting the money that you paid for it. That alone pays for like any wasted paint that you have once you transition over to those bottles. And I think I mentioned it earlier, but I used the Army Painter bottles. I think I paid like $6 for 10. So they're like a little less than $1 a piece. And then I also ordered some of the cheap ones. And I think I got like, I don't even know. I think it was like 50 of those for like $12. So they're much cheaper, but the lids don't fit quite as good. Where like the actual screw-on lids don't fit quite as good. So they kind of dry out a little bit and like end up a little messier when you shake them. And then also, if you go crazy squeezing the actual bottle, sometimes the top will blow off and your paint will just like spray out everywhere. So there's definitely reasons to or not to use those. And then also underneath my paper, I just keep like an old assembly manual or something like that, just so it doesn't like soak through. And I think we are all done with that color. So I'm just going to switch to the next one here. And because we're just doing, I'm not going to worry about drying this off right now or anything. We're going to do our stippling next. So again, I'm not going to mess around with like a palette or anything like that. But I do not want, like, the paper just sucks the moisture right out of it. So I'm going to use a plastic bag and just use that as basically like a little wet palette or a little, I don't know what you want to call it. little regular palette. And then I'm going to use this brush right here to do my stippling with. And the goal is to just get little bits of paint on the very tip of it. And I'm just going to kind of like poke it at random areas all over and just, deposit a little bit of the, this one is our Ryza rust. So this is part of the Citadel dries, and they're like clumpy and weird. So I have actually watered these down and stirred a little bit of water into it and everything. But they are definitely a little on the strange side. They're like really, really thick, and it almost looks like somebody left the lid off of a regular paint. So again, we'll just start with the bottom side and just kind of see how it looks. Make sure we don't have like too much paint on the brush or anything. And the goal here is to not look too uniform. So it doesn't have to be like perfect. But with like each step we do, I want to just have like a little more care because each step is just a little closer towards like the final product. So I'm not sure how well that shows up. I think pretty good overall. But again, this is not, we're not doing like our regular dry brushing technique with this. We're kind of just like stabbing the paintbrush at the piece. And then you can see obviously that, if we have like fresh little more like paint on there or something, it's going to be brighter and more concentrated. Obviously anything on the edges is going to be more likely to like grab the paint because it's like sticking out. But we almost want to get this down in some of the cracks, knowing that when we dry brush this later on, the edges the metal is going to like cover up what's on the edges. So we want to make sure that like the dry brush, we want the opposite. We want some of this down in like the cracks and the details. We don't want it just on the edges, or else when we do that metal, it's just going to cover up what we're doing with this. So it's kind of pointless. But we can already see the contrast we're getting. Like I want some down in like that little grate down in there where it looks like kind of some rust might have collected, some water might be sitting. But overall, now we can see kind of the difference between this one and this one. And because I have two pieces that are exactly the same, maybe I'm going to make sure that I don't do down in that little like rust bit there or whatever. I'm going to kind of do them opposite so that they like don't look too uniform. They're like sitting next to each other. But that's all we're doing here. Just repeating the same steps over and over again. You might, like, I'm kind of specifically going around and trying to jab it down in like the darker areas in the corners. You might just do it completely at random. But I'm not gonna lie, I'm very impressed with this orc terrain. There has not been a lot of like Xenos terrain over the years, with a couple of like exceptions. Some like the interactive terrain pieces, like the Tau had like a couple little bits, like the little I can't remember what it's called, tide wall gun something or another. And then we've had like a couple pieces of like the moon base. I guess that's really not even Xenos terrain, but this is by far takes a cake. And then like there's like obviously like the Sisters of Battle theme stuff. There's like the Space Marine like kind of bunker theme stuff. But this really like knocks it out of the park. I love this. And then obviously that Necron stuff that came out for the other kill team, the Pariah Nexus, that was super cool as well. I love that. And then if you haven't actually checked out that video, that's another one that's really cool and definitely like a little unique to the channel. As I basically created like some 3D printed designs for Necron terrain to add onto the old kill team board. So instead of having like the little blank spots, the little like blank spots, like where there's lines drawn on the board and they like block line of sight. I have like actual terrain that goes there and kind of fills out those spaces and blocks line of sight for people that are like a little more visually oriented or just to look cooler, in my opinion. But if you were like playing with your kid or something, it makes it a little more evident if you have an actual piece of terrain there to block line of sight. And I think the problem with that Pariah Nexus set was that it felt like the board was just a little naked and that terrain was just a little bit weak. But with the addition of the stuff that I made, that it turns into like an awesome set. And I can pin that video up here so you can check that out if you haven't already. I'm knocking this stuff out here. Might notice I had like a little bit too much on there that time, but not a big deal. Still looks okay when it's all said and done. If you do have a little bit more, or just to be like cautious, it's always better to start on the bottom, somewhere where you're not going to see, rather than like potentially messing up the top if you're going to be like finicky about it or whatever. Especially again, as we like get to some of the later steps, we'll be like a little more cautious with the details and how much paint's on our brush and everything. But as far as I'm concerned right now, I mean, the metallic's going to cover up a lot of this. And then honestly, when we have this whole thing, it looks nice when you have a couple spots that are like a little extra rusty or a little extra like metallic. It's not that big of a deal. And then like a piece like this where you actually have like some wood on it. I'm just gonna not pay attention to the wood specifically, but I'm also not gonna waste my effort putting it on the wood, knowing that that's gonna get painted later on. But if I get some on there, it's not a big deal. But I'm not gonna treat it like the metal would be, because obviously the wood would not be rusty. But I don't have to tell you that because you already know. And same with if you know you're gonna like later on be painting like a piece like this. Maybe you want to paint like all your diamond mail silver or copper or something like that. So, you wouldn't worry about getting that rusty, that Ryza rust. Wouldn't worry about getting that on there. And then this will do a cool effect too as we go to our next set and we start doing like the metallics on here. We'll notice that like it will leave some of this orange down in the cracks, but it will cover up the areas where we went a little too heavy on that orange, that's like more exposed or like sticking out. So it kind of does like, because we're using two different effects, it'll make it look like we did a much better job painting this than we actually did. So it's sort of like just a little cheater or a little tip. by combining multiple techniques, you know, it makes it look like you did a better job painting it to begin with, but really you're just covering up some of the mistakes. Coming along nicely though. Been going for about an hour, and we've got our, you know, not quite our second color painted on here. No, but the actual like assembly on these, really the cleaning is more than the assembly. And then like the spraying, you know, you just go in and spray for 5 minutes and then come back to it once it's dry and then spray the next color. Well, flip everything obviously and then come back and spray it. Definitely coming along nicely though. I think like the iron kind of looking like pieces are like what would be like the most kind of rusty, as we're like stuff that looks like kind of tin, or like it would be like you know, aluminum, or maybe we're gonna do like some copper on some of this stuff. Maybe for like the tanks we'll do those in copper because they look cool. uh you know, again, you can kind of focus your rust where you would want it a little bit more. Like these will probably be a different color, so I'm not as worried about them. But like these bars supports, those I think would be like the most rusty, especially like, you know, if they were repurposed from something else. Get a little bit down in that tire there. Looking good. Oh yeah, just glancing up at the screen now, after having done this for a little while and just seeing how everything's coming along. You know, definitely making some nice progress in my opinion. Looks obviously much better than unpainted. But even just like the little bit of paint that we had on here initially looked good. And you could have done, I thought about doing a little bit of like a zenithal, but I didn't really have a lighter brown. The lightest brown I had, or like the next brown I had, is like a khaki color, which I like a lot. It looks good and it goes well with this darker brown. But the problem is I want to do like sort of like a khaki around the bottom of it. So it looks like the sand is kind of coming up from the bottom, as where normally I would have it darker at the base with like a zenithal. So I thought it might just do like a reverse effect of what I wanted. Because if I did khaki like zenithal now, or like a lighter zenithal now, and then I went back and did light on the bottom, I thought it would like defeat the purpose of the zenithal. Because obviously the zenithal is to simulate like the sunlight coming from above. So if we make the top lighter coming from above because of the sunlight, and then we make the bottom lighter later to simulate like the dust or like sand from the board, we're just going to end up with everything kind of lighter. And I just thought that might look a little too uniform. And I think with this, I really want it to be, I really want like that randomness to it. So, you know, typically I would have everything lighter the further it is from the ground or the higher up it goes. But in this case, I kind of wanted like the opposite effect, because I know I'm doing that sand later on, that sandy color. And again, one nice thing about the plastic bag is when this is all said and done, I don't have to worry about cleaning it. You know, I can just throw that away, which again just saves me extra time that I could be like actually painting or whatever instead of cleaning. Which, if you only have so much hobby time per week, or you know yourself and you only are going to do so much, whether you're cleaning something or painting something, you know, it's still digging into your hobby time. So, in my opinion, any time I can spend not having to clean my tools or whatever is extra time I can be like painting or building or converting, etc. So you can kind of see those are popping apart there. But I'm not really going to worry about popping them apart and painting down in there because I do plan on gluing these later on permanently. I just haven't done it yet, just to kind of see how this goes. Looks good though, and you can kind of see as I finish one piece but go towards the next, up close it might look like there's like a glob of paint, but then once it's set back with everything, it just kind of all just blends together. And then that one little spot might catch your attention, but all of a sudden it doesn't look so terrible. As if you're just like staring right at it and saying, oh man, I just left a glob of paint on there. Well, by the time you zoom out a little bit and look at everything you got, it's not so bad. And it really adds to the randomness. You know, if you spend a little too much time making sure everything's perfect and there's only so much paint on your brush for any of the given steps, it's going to look like a little too uniform, I think. As with this, you know, we start off when there's a little more paint on the brush, like moving it all over the place. And then as the paint's kind of rubbing off and there's less and less on here, we're just kind of filling in like the areas where we didn't get paint before. So you end up with some areas that are like the bright or like more metallic for the later steps, and then some that are like, you know, kind of faded in between. But you can see now just by doing this brighter orange, basically, after that mournfang brown, we can see, you know, the mournfang brown blends right into like the black and the, you know, brown primer or base that we used on there already. So just by adding in now like a fourth color, we have the black, we have the dark brown that I sprayed it with, we have the mournfang brown, and now we have this Ryza rust. You know, you can see now the mournfang brown blends into the black and brown so much more. So like each step kind of tones down all the steps before it. And that's why, like, especially in the earlier steps, I'm not really that worried about it. But you know, as we get towards the later steps, I'll be a little more careful. And then once I'm like picking out the actual details, I'll be the most careful. But I'm still not going to be that careful because it is, you know, an orc set. So I don't want it to look like, you know, they paid a professional painter to come in and make everything look perfect. I want it to look like sort of like a, you know, junkyard, scrapyard, like Mad Max kind of like future scenario. And if you look at this terrain and really pay attention to it, you know, I love how Games Workshop did on it because like there's all kinds of like inside the little barricades and stuff. There's all kinds of like little bits of like wrecked orc vehicles. And then like when you pay attention to this, there's like little control panels off like the Space Marine sets. And like, you know, little extra doors or like little pieces of, you know, different materials, basically like patching holes. You know, I love it. I think they killed it on this set. Like I was saying, you know, it's sometimes it's harder to do stuff randomly and make it look random and junky than it is to just do it nice and make it look perfect. So like for Games Workshop to be able to get that effect so well of just a random like junk scrap pile all like, you know, welded and stuck together and bolted on, you know, sometimes that's harder than just building like a nice set that looks like it's straight out of the factory, like built like that, supposed to be that way. So I definitely give them props on this. And another thing too, I will show you actually after I finish this. You know, I have only seen up until the last couple of days when I started busting into these kill team sets, I had only really seen what was shown online, and I did not realize how awesome these terrain sets truly are. Once you look in the kill team book, you know, if you already have it or whatever, you'll know what I'm talking about. But before I actually did, I only had seen like the videos and Games Workshop how they showed it off. But just how it's sitting here now, you can probably already tell that the way these pieces are set, they have like a matching bit. So they actually go together into like one building. So when you put them next to each other like that, they form into a wall like they're meant to be that way. And then same thing with the other sides. They all have like that universal fit basically. So now you could basically assemble this all into just one gigantic building. You could make it into two halves, or you can keep it how it comes in like four pieces, like four smaller pieces. So if you want to have like, you know, a sort of like attacker defender scenario, you know, maybe you want it to be like a fort and one person has like a smaller team or a smaller army if you're playing 40K, you know, and it's going to be like a little tougher. Or maybe they don't get to use vehicles, only infantry, you know, whatever special rules or narrative or whatever you want to do, you know, or just regular rules, but giving one team an advantage, whatever the situation is, you know, it creates like an awesome little extra option and like flavor to your games. And then obviously, you know, if you want to have like a fully symmetrical board, you can do that too, because you get two each of the two larger pieces, you get two each of. You know, and there's obviously two different ones. So you have these four big pieces with two of each. And then like there's the smaller little like oil rig piece, you know, that can kind of go like in the middle, or you could put that on one side if you want one side to have like a larger piece. And then you have like a bunch of like little random a bunch of little random like scatter train, and then you know a couple small barricade scatter train that are the same. But overall, very happy with not only the quality of the terrain, but the amount that you get in this set. I think a lot of people with the Mechanicus set, it wasn't quite enough. And you know, I can't even just say it for other people, because whenever I did a kill team set or a combat patrol set for like the Deptus Mechanicus, I would use all the terrain from the kill team starter set, and then I would add in like a couple extra platforms and like a couple extra of the can't think what they're called, but like the little like cylindrical pieces, and then like the stuff that came on their sprues. So I would always add in just a little extra terrain because it just never quite felt like enough. And I would always rather have too much and just not use it all than not enough and feel like it was lacking. So with this set, I can honestly say that they give you a great amount. I mean, you can see obviously this is like a kill team board that I'm painting right on top of. And, you know, once this is all done and set up and everything, this isn't even everything, but you can see how much you actually get. So let's just kind of slap this stuff together and see how it looks. So obviously, like I said, these aren't actually glued, but you basically have one piece. You basically have like little notches on here, and you just line them up with the notches on this piece, and it basically clicks right into place. If you know what you're doing. And then once you got it on there, it's pretty solid. Like it's not going to fall apart, especially once you add that third piece on. And then same thing for this one. Hope I don't get tetanus from this. That was a joke. I mean, it definitely looks all rusty and crusty now. Oh, maybe this. I think the end pieces go on first. There we go. And then promise you this is not as complicated as I'm making it. There we go. And then this is the super cool thing. When you put them together, they're actually like these bits of the floor are set up to where like one piece goes over and one piece goes under, and then it turns it into basically like that little bit of a building, and then you can spin around to the other side. And when you're looking at it like this, especially if you didn't know what you're looking for, because the pieces aren't uniform where it comes together, because it's not a straight line, it doesn't really attract your eye to it, so it looks like it's supposed to be, you know, like that, like it's supposed to be one building. And I think that's where they really killed it. But the best part is that you get, you know, this all came in the one set plus extras, like stuff that I don't have shown right here. But when we put this all together is when it's absolutely like next level. And if you already have your own set, you probably already know what I'm talking about. But this is like the coolest part. So then when you put this piece here, and then slap that on there. Put that on there. And now your two pieces that are the same go together and form this. The only problem is you got a hole there in the middle, but then you get these little pieces and you can slap them right on there. Oh, I messed it up. There we go. And now you've got basically one giant building. And I mean, that's like I said, if you didn't just watch me put that together, or you didn't know what you were looking at, I don't think that would, like, your eye would draw you to it, to where you would even notice that. So again, let me just set it back up here. So you can see it a little more clear. A little more clearly. So close. If I wasn't videoing, it would never have fallen apart, but of course, because I'm videoing, it's like every time I move anything. Yeah, well, you get the point. I don't know what I'm doing wrong here. I think I'm just like pushing it a little bit as I go. It's also a pain too because I have all this stuff right in front of my face, blocking me. Maybe could put like a tiny little magnet or something in there. A couple of them so it doesn't fall. Yeah, that's it. But you get the point. I think if I did it like this, put that one on there, and then this, put that one on there. Yeah, okay. I give up. But you see what we got going on here. And then the other cool thing is too, you know, obviously if we took this piece and put it right there, that's just the same as we had it before. But if you take the two pieces that are the same, this is two of the same piece right here, but you can actually put those two together also. So they will go together like they're meant to be together and give us like a little bit more of a different like kind of corner piece. And then same thing with these ones. So that's two of the same piece. And then this is two of the same piece. But because the way this is built, we can actually assemble it, you know, into, this one's like a big long corner. That one has a long side and a short side. But overall, I mean, you can't beat these sets. They're just absolutely phenomenal. You know, and relatively even, relatively uniform. But overall, very, very cool. And looking super rusty and crusty right now. So, yeah, doing well. At about an hour and 16 minutes so far. And you guys have watched me get to this point, including refilling one of my paints. So I think that's not bad for what it is so far. And then, should I take these apart? Yeah, I'm going to take them back apart for the dry brushing step for the metallics. So we'll leave them together like this. Yeah, so I think you could probably have these glued and there's enough flex to them that you would be able to separate them how you need to get the tops off here. These ones maybe not quite as much. I would either leave them completely unglued forever or paint them first and then glue them. But that's just me. But there's really no reason not to glue these pieces on and like the 90s together, I don't think. Not that I figured out at least. Maybe there's something, maybe I'll figure something out around the way and I'll make a video. But overall, very, very cool. So next I'm going to grab a leadbelcher. Give it a good shake, and I just flip that over just so we don't get the orange mixing right in with the metal. But it really doesn't matter in the end, honestly. I'm going to see how this works for the actual dry brushing the edges. Just because the paint dries so damn fast when you do it the other way. So we'll just start like this on the bottom piece and see how that kind of comes out. And that's basically what we're looking for. We want to make sure that we don't like cover up all the stuff we added on. But the goal is to basically just pick out the edges with the metallics. And obviously the more metallics we do, like the more it's going to look like our set's worn down. But we want somewhere in between rusty worn and metallic worn edges. And again, we might do some pieces a little more rusty and worn, or some parts, and then others a little less. Which I was thinking that because we're going to do like the kind of sand color at the bottom of the big terrain pieces, that maybe we would do like a little heavier metallics towards the top, and then again use like a second metal shade kind of towards the top as well. And then obviously we can pick out any extra metal details we want later too. So, but I can already see this is giving us the effect I was looking for. And then obviously, like, you know, if there's certain metals that you want to be more metallic and less rusty, you could do it in this step a little bit, you know, like go a little heavier on these pieces if you're not going to go back later. But I want to actually do like, I want to pick out some of the details later on. So I'm not that worried about it. I'm just going to kind of like more uniformly do this step and then later on go back and pick out some of these extra details Or it might just do it for you. Like there, it looked like that kind of picked out itself. Yeah, I mean, just looking at the camera, how it picks up, you can see almost like that piece specifically made itself brighter just when we went over like the diamond plate. So here, this is what I'm talking about with like the taller pieces. I'm going to do a little less metal on the bottom and a little more metal on the top. And then later on, we're going to do the opposite with the airbrush or dry brushing from the bottom up with like that sand color. And then hopefully that will give us the effect I was discussing. But again, we don't want to go too heavy on this either because we don't want to take away from like all the cool rust effect that we got on here to begin with. Definitely want to find somewhere in between. And then if we're taking away a little more than we want to, maybe we can just like transition to a smaller brush. But I'm going to leave basically the bottom like almost untouched. And we'll see as we go. Each step is just less and less than the one before. It takes less time and obviously less effort. And like the wood right here, I'm not going to really bother with because we know that's going to get painted later on. And I might use like some of the contrast paints for the wood. There's a couple of them that work real well on like a wood texture. You could just hand paint them and then wash it afterwards. One thing I just really like about the contrast paints is you almost get like, I mean, and I know it's the point of them, but you almost get like a 3-for-1. You can put a coat of like white on and then contrast paint, or just contrast right over whatever color you're using, and you get essentially the base color that you're using. You get the wash, and then you get the highlight as well, because the contrast kind of like flows down into the cracks and does them so much darker. And then you have kind of like the neutral color in between, and then by the time you're finished, you know, you have the highlight has almost no paint left on it, but it's kind of just got like a tint to it. But I think for most people, though, honestly, even for myself, like it was great having all the contrast paints and getting to test them out. But the truth is, I mean, I probably use like, I think you could pick out 6 or 10 contrast paints and only use those and you'd be completely fine with it. Like for the flesh tones, I like to have a few different flesh tones. I definitely like having like 3 or so flesh tones, but the Guilliman flesh is overall the best one. But I also like to have a little bit of diversity between like the skin tones of models. Same with like some of the browns. You know, the snakebite leather is absolutely amazing. Uh, you know, and then you could probably pick like wildwood or just one of the other browns and be completely fine with it. But again, you know, having like 3 or 4 different browns, they do all have like really nice different effects and everything. But you could definitely get away with like one brown, one flesh tone. Skeleton Horde is almost a necessity, I think. The Black Templar is black. I use so much like in place of just regular black. It works really well over metallics. It's just an amazing paint in general. And then the white is excellent as well. I've never really loved Games Workshop's whites, and they always seem like they're just kind of difficult. But honestly, the contrast white is just absolutely amazing. It's perfect. You just paint white or base coat in white or primer in white, whatever you want to call it, and then you just slap that on over top of it, and it basically like turns the shadows into almost like a gray, and then leaves that like beautiful clean white of like your primer or base coat. As where a lot of times if you're trying to paint white over something else and get that white look, you have to water it down, and then it's got to be the perfect consistency, and then a lot of times it's like a little streaky or like chunky. You can kind of see like the brush strokes. I've just never loved how model paints did white until the Games Workshop contrast paint white. That one is just absolutely phenomenal. And then after that, I use like the red, the Blood Angels red or Mephiston red. No, Blood Angels red, I think it's called. I use that one quite a bit for like crack grenades. I use like the Orc Flesh one for like frag grenades. Obviously, it works really well for actual Orc Flesh. Also, or like, you know, if you were going to do some kind of lizard man or whatever, the Pterodon turquoise is amazing. The warp stone, no, the warp lightning green one That one is absolutely phenomenal. I use that on like power weapons a lot of the time. The blue one, Talisar Blue, is absolutely amazing. Probably one of my favorite paints all the time. It's just super bright and goes on perfectly. I use it for like a lot of cloth on like Adeptus Custodes and Sisters of Battle for like the white with blue, white armor with like the blue cloth. Goes really well. Let's see, what else? Man, there's so many good ones. The skeleton horde is amazing for like skulls or actual like skeletons. Yeah, I think that's probably my favorite ones. Yeah, I think that's all my favorite ones right there. But again, amazing range. Oh, you know what else? I almost forgot one of the best ones. The Iandin Yellow. Yellow is another one of those colors that's just seems like it's never quite works right, or you got to put way too much effort in to make it look good. Iandin Yellow is just absolutely amazing. It gives you like the perfect like orange kind of down in the cracks when it dries, and then like the actual bits that are like the highlighted portions of it are just like a beautiful, perfect yellow that's almost like impossible to achieve with just regular paints, in my opinion, or at least for the same amount of effort, anyway. Oh yeah, starting to get a nice little metallic look to it. Definitely liking how this is coming out. I think you could probably use something with bigger um, bristles, like thicker bristles, something more like a standard kind of brush, like what we did for that. And you would get like a little less of like these small bristles kind of make everything a little bit more uniform. If you had big bristles, I think it would kind of blend a little less. But I like how this is looking. It's definitely coming out nice. And I think when we pick out a couple of the panels is when it's really going to start looking great. Or like use a little bit lighter of a metal for like a highlight. I think like Ruin Fang steel will work perfect with this. And then also once we have like our buildings and we're doing them like I was saying, more metallics towards the top and then kind of like the dusty sand towards the bottom, I think that's going to come out really nice as well. And you can see I'm kind of focusing it a little more on like the different metallics. Again, you don't have to do that because we're probably going to come back and paint those separate anyway. But just for now, it's going to give us a little less like uniformity. And who knows? I mean, you might not do that right away. So maybe you want to come back later and do that. I'm going to do this one too the same way. Kind of like that diamond plate. This like I feel like would be a different metal. And then this great piece right here and here. Looking good though, definitely liking it. This is where I think we're gonna see the real difference. Just because we have these like big uniform pieces. I think focusing on the top and kind of doing like down from top to bottom is gonna really give us the effect we want. Is it's gonna look like basically they're more weathered at the top. I'm still gonna kind of work my way towards the bottom, but when I have a little less paint on my brush and just with a little less conviction, maybe a little more like side to side at the bottom, but I don't want to take away from as much of like the rust and brown effects on the bottom as we're on top. I want that to be mostly metallic. And if you ever mess something up, it wouldn't be that hard to go back and, take it back one notch. Make it like a little more rusty with a little stippling or like, make it a little extra metallic or whatever, whatever effect. If you didn't like it, you could go back and I think reverse pretty easily with minimal effort. Yeah, I think that looks good. Let's see. Yeah, kind of looking at them next to each other now, you see how much, like before they were starting to look a little bit orange, a little like extra rusty. I think now we're really getting like the effect we want. So, And again, if we start up top towards the tips, and then as it kind of rubs off a little more of the paint, we can kind of work our way down, so we don't overly metallic like the lower areas of it. But we do want some. Obviously, we want it to look like the whole thing is worn. But again, I mean, I feel like if the elements and stuff rubbing on it or whatever is going to kind of wear it down, we want to kind of focus that towards the top. And then as we get lower, you know, less and less of it will be worn. Looking good. Looking real good. And then again, like I think a lot of times on a step like this, when everything is very uniform, it might not fully get across the effect you were looking for or hoping for. But I think once we come back and really start to pick out some of the details is when this is going to look the best. You know, once we add in a little bit of like the different color metallics or like some other colors like blue or red or yellow, whatever we decide to do, I think is when it's really going to start to shine. And then also because the camera is kind of looking down at it, sometimes the extra effect of like sort of the zenithal metallics or zenithal lighting, depending what you're doing, isn't going to show up as clearly as where if I'm looking at it like from eye level, more like my perspective, how I'm sitting, I can see like the transitions a little bit more and it gets the effect across just a little bit more. Do just a little bit more. I think we're good. And then you may decide you want to come back later on and do a little bit of like the little metallic weathering once you've actually painted on some of the details. You know, because maybe you have like some orky like nostalgia or memorabilia or whatever you want to call it on here, and you want that to look worn as well. Like it wasn't just painted after this thing's been sitting out here worn down for years. So you can do that, you know, in a different order. Maybe you want to paint some details and then come back and do this. Maybe you want to do this and then come back and paint some more details and then do just a lighter coat of this afterwards. You know, the choice is yours. There's obviously infinite options and no wrong way to do it for sure. Like for instance, this sign right here, you may want to like paint out some of that detail first and then come back and kind of hit it with like the metallic edges. So it looks like the paint has worn off. I'll probably do some of that like by hand, but maybe I will do it. We'll see. But yeah, that's a nice coat of our metallics right there. Everything looks pretty darn good. Now I have a little extra lead belcher on my palette right here, aka plastic bag. So I'm just gonna grab a junk brush real quick. And I'm just gonna pick out a little bit of the details and just use up some of this. So I'm just going to start on the edge and be like a little more careful around the edges, and then just kind of fill it in from there. And I'm just going to do that for like the different pieces that we have here that are like different materials. Nothing too crazy. Could do, I think this one too here. And I'm not going to go like super crazy and worry about getting down in like all the cracks or anything. Because I want it to look like it's still like dirty and worn and everything. So again, it is a terrain piece. I don't want to go too crazy. I'm not worried about it being perfect or messing up or anything like that. And then if we do mess up a little bit and get on some of the other stuff, it's just going to look like a little wear on the other things, because that's the color we did for the wear. So obviously you can see now, even though it's the same color, just picking out those pieces makes it kind of stand out a little bit more and give us a little bit more of that look we're going for. And then later on, if we want to do, say we don't want these to look the same, but we painted these the same way, maybe we'll use like two different washes. You could use um, to kind of tint the metal a little different. So one could have like more of like an agrax, earth shade wash, as where maybe like, the next panel over, you're going to do more of like a Reichland flesh shade or Nuln oil. So it kind of gives it like a different tint. So it allows us to basically change the color of the same metallic. And I've used like the like blue and red washes as well to kind of do that same effect, and it actually works out really well. Really cool effect that you wouldn't normally think to like paint a red or a blue or something like that wash over a metallic, but it came out really nice. You almost get like a pink when you do it with the red one, and it looks super cool. I did it for the actually for the other Kill Team set with the, what was that one? Rogue Trader. I did like all the doors like that. I did half of them with like sort of a blue tint and half of them with a red tint, and it was sort of like experimental, and it came out really nice. I love how that set turned out. Hopefully they'll come out with rules for those factions as well eventually. I know that was like the only way to actually get those models, but for anybody that has them and likes them, I really like the Star Striders and the Gellerpox Infected. They're both two super cool kill teams. So I would love to see them eventually make their way in here. Maybe not the most competitive, but some people actually had pretty good luck, or pretty good, I don't want to say luck because it really was skill and practice, but pretty good results with the Gellerpox there for a while in competitive kill team. You actually saw like a few tournament circuits where they were popping up doing pretty well. Yeah, that looks nice. So I'm going to just do all the kind of material that was those. It's like the two different styles of like this steel with like the ridges in it. And then like the diamond plate steel as well. As if those are like maybe like not going to rust the same way or something like that. Also, I can already tell you this diamond plate material, the way it picks up on the camera, it's going to look so cool once you go back and do like a nice like dry brush like steel over top of that, something a little bit lighter. It's really like just the awesomeness of the metallics are going to really pick up nicely and give it like a cool little like effect. So it looks good now, but it's going to look really good later, I think. Do these ones. but I think I'm gonna do like a nice copper, maybe on the tanks, like the big tanks like that. I think that's gonna be a real nice looking effect. Um, haven't quite decided yet. I want to do either like maybe red and blue for the two different bases. So you have like two pieces that have like the red kind of icon on them, and two pieces that have the blue. So it's kind of like red base and blue base. Or obviously you can kind of put them together and it doesn't look too crazy because they sort of match with our overall paint scheme. I think that would look pretty cool. So we'll see. I haven't decided yet. Maybe I'll do. I think the box art is more like red and yellow, and I think the yellow will look really good on this, especially like I was saying with that contrast yellow. That could look really nice on this. But for some reason, I just really like a nice copper. Just goes so well with like the old rusty beat down look like this. But again, the key is for me, I just don't want any of the terrain to be like so bright that it's like catching your eye. One of my like favorite kill team channels, or one of the biggest kill team channels, which I'm sure you've heard of it, is Glass Half Dead. His stuff is always cool, and his content and everything's great, and he like specializes in kill team. But when he did his set up, he painted his with like a metallic undercoat instead of doing this way, and then went the other direction with it. He painted everything metallic and then did like a wash on it. And I'm sure he's happy with this set and he likes it and everything. But I do not like how like bright the metallics are on his set. And then he used a lot of bright colors as well. And to tell you the truth, I'm just not a big fan of that because when you look at the actual videos or when you see like a picture of the table, there's just like too much going on. It's like too busy. It's like it looks like somebody wearing a Hawaiian shirt and not a good one. It's just like wild and colorful, and it's like, oh, looks like somebody like threw up on your table. No offense, Glass. I'm sure you don't watch this, but also I mean, being like a full time painter, commission painter, and 20 something year hobbyer, I feel like I have a pretty good idea what I do and don't like. Does not mean other people's stuff doesn't look good. Doesn't mean they don't like it or love it better than my stuff. But I know what I like, and for me, too much colors on something like that is just too much. Now, if we're talking about some Harlequins or something like that, some nice clean colors and a bunch of different ones, and you start using that color wheel, look, they could look awesome. But for terrain, I don't want too many colors. It just is too much, especially for a battle report. Like for a battle report, I want the terrain just to all blend in and just look rusty and old and plain and not catch your eye. But then if you start looking at it, pause the frame, or you look at it in like a still shot, you might see some details and be like, oh, that's awesome. Look at that. And then you kind of zoom it in and start noticing stuff. But I don't want your eye to be drawn towards it. I definitely want the terrain to be like the afterthought. Don't want it to take away from like how cool the models are. Because in the end, that's what it's all about. I mean, the terrain is cool because it's like the environment, but I don't want the environment to take over. I've obviously iterated and reiterated that point a couple times. So hopefully I'll stop talking about it. But I mean, if you're still here now, you must like watching me paint or watching me talk or both. So can't be too bad. Been a while since I did like the equivalents of like a hobby hangout. And I may start doing some live streams if people appreciate that or enjoy that. Definitely wouldn't mind it. But I think filming these longer videos where I actually paint and just kind of cut up, I think it's good. I like, me personally, I like to watch longer videos while I'm doing something. I'll put it on in the background. And then when something cool happens, I might pause it and go back, or I might look up and pay attention for a minute. But overall, it's nice to just have somebody hobbying while you hobby. I think overall, like a lot of us, we hobby alone. You might not have buddies that are into it that are going to hang out with you at your house while you put in the work, or like a wife or girl or kids might not be into it. So it can be a lonely hobby, especially with like lockdowns and CVD over the last year. Like I pretty much haven't gotten to play at all, so I've really just been doing commissions and working on my own stuff and getting my hobby on. Making videos for me is kind of like socializing, even though it's kind of a one-way street. I mean, it's definitely a one-way street, but it's nice. I'm not sure what I'm gonna pick out on this as far as like brighter steel. I'll probably do maybe like the straps, but maybe I'll do them in a different color. I don't know. Let's look at some of these little pieces here. So, same thing. I don't have anything specifically picked out that I was gonna do on these. I could do probably like these bits. I could do this would look probably cool in a different color, maybe like a copper. Again, I could probably do some of these bits. Here we got a little bit of that same material. For now, I'm just gonna leave it as like this material I'm doing. So it's like a little uniform, but not too much. So it kind of looks like, you know, like whatever scraps they had is the same, but wherever they used it, it's like that kind of same look to it or color. But these things are cool, like these little barricades. You can see like this one has part of like one of the jets. It has like the front from like one of the trucks on here. Orcs are definitely resourceful. Gotta give them that. Yeah, that looks good. I like that. And then, so I didn't really pay attention to if there's any on these right here. Yeah, there's just some little bits there. Sort of like your accent wall for anybody that's ever done like construction or like home renovations or whatever. We just got our little accent panels here. I'm sure I'll probably miss some or come back later and decide there's some other bits I want to do. And I'll do like that piece right there. I mean, you could just come back and do all the little bolts if you wanted to. I mean, there's so much detail on these. It's up to you how caught up you get painting detail. Because honestly, you could, I mean, you could spend a week painting this like beautifully and have it look awesome and using washes and blocking out colors and, you know, edge highlights. And I mean, you could spend a lifetime on this stuff. But that is not the goal of this video. Not me. So yeah, I'm going to do only those specific metallics like we've been doing. And I'm going to try to keep it pretty clean overall. But again, this is our edge highlight metal. So if we get a little bit somewhere else, it's not that big of a deal. Got a little bit up here. Yeah, I think we got them all. Does look nice and rusty and crusty, I feel like, in the video. Where are we at? Well, coming up on about 2 hours. I'll probably call it at the 2 hour mark and you know, see how everything looks and go from there. It's probably a good stopping point for today, or just right around them when I finish up these little bits. And then I'll just come back and keep painting in the next video and keep rolling through. But I mean, for 2 hours, I'd say, you know, it's not quite what I would consider, you know, tabletop, but it's doable. Like, I would like to have a couple more colors in here. But I think, you know, by depending what your actual like tabletop standards are, I think you could argue that, you know, we're very close, if not there, or will be by the time we're finished. See a little bit down in there. Yeah, I mean, the more I look at these, because this is really the first time, like I said, I'm really handling these. The more I look at them, the more I just appreciate all the awesome detail in everything. I mean, this set is so sweet. I actually had a small orc army, or beginning of an orc army, I picked up a while ago. And when I saw they were making all the new stuff, I went ahead and just sold it off for a couple $100. I had like 50 boys that I had like started building and everything. But I got such a good deal on them used on eBay, and like salvaged them and then rebased them, and put on weapons, fixed a bunch of stuff. And then by the time it was all said and done, I basically got back what I paid for them. Actually did a little better on them. But that was not my intention. But I had painted up a Gazcall pretty nice. He's about 75 to 90% done. And I kept him. But I knew when I saw some of the new models that I was going to want some of the new models. I saw they were making the boys and the Beast Snagga boys. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to need those. So I might as well just get rid of these old orcs I got and then get the new ones. And for me, especially something that was only partially painted and I hadn't put a ton of effort or money into, it felt like it sort of justifies me getting some of the new stuff if I get rid of some of the old stuff. But if I have a bunch of orcs that are not finished, it's harder for me to justify getting a bunch more orcs because I'm like, well, I haven't even done the stuff I have. So that was my justification, at least. If I get rid of the out with the old, in with the new. Yeah, that's it. And like I love the Beast Snagga boys. So I don't know if they're good in game terms or how good they are, or if they're worth the points or whatever. But I know I definitely want a nice core force of those dudes. I believe they're a regular troop choice. I haven't actually looked in the codex if there's like a limitation or anything. But assuming that you could just build them as your core unit, the new boys are super cool as well. But the Beast Snagga boys are just so awesome. I used to play fantasy back in the day, and I had the Savage Orcs and Goblins army, and I love the Savage Orcs, and the Beast Snagga boys remind me of like the 40k version of the old Savage Orcs. So for me, as soon as I saw them, I was like, oh yeah, what's better than just orcs? Like, primitive orcs with skulls. Yeah, I'll take those. Looking good. But that Goscoal model is like, again, one of like my favorite models ever. So amazing. And I mean, I'm sure I'll probably miss some little panels right here. So later on, I might notice as I'm painting that I missed one and go back and paint that one. I might just not paint it, and it won't be perfect or it won't stand out or whatever. Um, totally cool with either. And obviously that is your option as well. If you're painting along with me, or if you like different colors, or if you don't like one of the steps, maybe you thought it looked cooler before I dry brushed the metal, or maybe like the orange is just a little too bright for you and you want to do a different color or something instead, that's totally cool. Hopefully this video will give you motivation to hobby along with me and paint along or paint something else while I'm doing this or build something or whatever. Or alternatively, help to motivate you or give you some tips or tricks or whatever along the way. So, but that's what these videos are all about. Making sure that we're getting some stuff done, hobbying it up, having a little fun, and making progress on our collection, whether it's models, terrain, whatever. So I think we just got one more piece to work on, and then we're at 155. So they can finish this one off in the next 5 minutes, and that'd be a pretty good place to stop, I think. And by finish it off, I just mean like this color. But I think once I add in a little bit of the coppers and do a little bit of some highlighting on some of these metallics, especially like the diamond plating and stuff like that, this is really going to start to pop. And then obviously adding in a couple other colors, because every color we add in takes it just a little bit more to the next level. But again, the overall effect, I just want it to look uniform and worn, all like it's been around here for the same amount of time or damn near the same amount of time. But I just want to make sure that the different materials kind of stand out. Because obviously something like stainless steel is going to get dirty, but it's not going to get rusty. As where like, you know, our iron steel or just more like traditional, it's going to be all rusty and crusty and gross. And I mean, just looking at this actual terrain, you know, if you didn't watch me paint it right now, it looks like I would be getting tetanus just handling this stuff. Maybe it's just me, but I like look over at it or see it out of the corner of my eye, and it definitely looks like it's full of tetanus. Reminds me of like something that you would see at the junkyard or an old tractor that like broke down in the woods like 100 years ago. It's been parked out there rotting away. But yeah, I think as soon as I add like some non-metallic, non-rusty colors to it, because like, you know, you got to figure pretty much what do we have on here right now? We have like black and brown and orange, which is all basically just right next to each other in like the color spectrum. You know, like the brown is basically black and orange mixed together. So we really just have like that same color throughout everything. And I think as we add in another color or two, is when it's really going to start to pop. And then like we were talking about before about with like the parts that like move and stuff like that. And I feel like picking out something like this, like on the oil rig, like the little piston, that's like, I actually don't have it with everything right now. I feel like that's the same type of thing where it might be like, you know, so it has smooth action or whatever. It might be like a stainless steel or something a little different because it matters if it rusts because it still needs to work. As with the rest of the door, might not be that fancy, clean stuff. And you might not even need to like flip over and do the bottoms because it's terrain, whatnot. Yeah, that looks cool. Gives it just like a little bit more of a little more detail so it just stands out. And I'll do these too. Nice. Do this one up to match. I like how that came out though. Looks cool. Very cool. Yeah, but this is such a nice set. There's just so much detail on this. I mean, you could literally, if you let this, I think it could overwhelm you because you could just paint these forever. There's so many little details. I think you have to be really, really selective as to what you're going to paint or decide, you know, how much time or, you know, how many colors or whatever it is. Whatever your limitation is, setting them or just being able to decide, like, okay, that's enough. I'm stopping here. Otherwise, I think you would never get these done because there's just so much detail. You could get lost in it forever. And if you were like trying to make sure everything looks perfect, you might get frustrated spending too much time or effort on something that otherwise would probably never be noticed. Because I mean, you could make a million mistakes on this and no one would ever notice, you know, whether or not it was intentional or even to like look to see, oh, look, you messed that up. You went outside the lines. Paint outside the lines, starting over. All right. Looks good though. I like it. So that is exactly the 2 hour mark on my end from when I started recording. So definitely happy with that. Been a while since I did a nice video like that, 2 hours. And definitely, you know, kind of demonstrating that you could have this on the table and looking pretty good, I think, in a reasonable amount of time. And because it's you know, it's really not that many pieces for the actual build, also. So by the time you clip it all out and clean it, and then you actually get into building it, you know, you get to end up with a pretty nice set in a pretty decent amount of time, especially with a paint job like this. Now, once I add in that copper, I think this is really going to pop, and then like some couple other colors too. But already I'm just loving how this looks. Looks awesome. So, well, there you have it, guys. If you enjoyed the video today, if you're still here right now, make sure that you like and subscribe. Share it with your friends anywhere on social media. Obviously, you know, do commissions, do videos, reviews, everything. So if you are interested in any of that, obviously you can reach out to us. Or if you have any suggestions, recommendations, or questions about the paints or techniques or anything like that, I'd be happy to hear those in the comments down below. Always list off the paints used in the videos in the description, and then also like the models or techniques or whatever as well. So you can always find that down below as well, for like the paints, the primers, etc. Yeah, that's it for today, guys. Appreciate you staying this long. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. I am Warhammer Man. This is Warhammer Man Studios, and I'm out of here.